Bonjour, Kinamagi and Nene Ireland and Dejnikas, and welcome to this production of the Mind Math Network. Today's episode, Chapter 9, Lesson 12, Subtract Mixed Numbers. Let's begin by looking at yesterday's work, where we added mixed numbers. Basic steps include making sure you have a common denominator, such as when it's 8 and 2, we had a common denominator of 8. We added the whole numbers, we added the fractions. If the fractions totaled an improper fraction, we simplified that so there was a whole number and a fraction. And you could divide the denominator into the numerator to do that. Your remainder becomes the numerator, the whole, and you keep the same denominator. And then you simplify at the end. So we had 7 and 4/5, 18 and a half, 10 and an eighth, 5 and a half, 17 and 13/15, and 22 and 1/20. We're here, 10 and 7/8 inches, 28 and 5/7. And they asked you to do this in word form here. So make sure you did. And that's a reminder that and is that dividing line between whole numbers and either decimals or fractions. Yes, he carried 10 and 5/12 gallons after 3 trips. And 4 and 12 gallons on that. Let's look at the homework for today. We're going to do the exact same thing, except we're going to subtract. Other rules apply. Making sure we have a common denominator. There is a possibility, and we'll see if once we get into the work, that you could have to borrow. And we'll talk about that if we come to it. The essential question in lesson 12, how can equivalent fractions help me add and subtract fractions? Simple answer, I can't unless I have the equivalent fraction. So I'll begin outside of the book. So this part is not in your book. What are some strategies you might try when subtracting mixed numbers? Well, I'm probably going to begin by subtracting the fraction first and then the whole number. And that way I know if I had to borrow from or regroup. And when I talk about the regrouping, let's say I have 4 1/4 minus 2 and 2/4. Now, normally this would be a half, but let's say I already simplified it or got the common denominator. What you can do sometimes, because you can't subtract 2 from 1, is you could regroup and make this a 3. And then because there's 4/4 in a whole, you add the 4 up here and you get the 5/4. 5 minus 2 is 3. You don't subtract the denominator. 3 minus 2 is 1. So that is something that you might come across. It's much more common with the homework that they give in middle school, but that way you've seen it at least if it comes up in this lesson. Kathy has 2 small dogs. Spot weighs 5 and 5/8 pounds and Max weighs 4 and 3/8 pounds. How much more does Spot weigh than Max? Solve any way you choose. And when they say that, you could use fraction tiles. You could use standard algorithm. I'm going to go ahead with the standard algorithm. Because eventually that's where you need to be. First step, I know it's going to be over 8, and I'm not going to worry about simplifying yet. 5 minus 3 is 2. 5 minus 4 is 1. 1 and 2/8, I keep the 1. 2 and 8 are both divisible by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 8 divided by 2 is 4. My answer is 1 1/4 pounds. You could write out pounds. You could use LBS. Make sure that you label, especially as we're getting to this latter part of the year. Make sure you have those labels as that next step. I'll go ahead and clear it. Here's an example of the drawing here. You can see that they had the 5 and 5/8, and we removed 4 and 3/8. That left us with 1 and 2/8, which is 1 1/4. So that's another way you could do this. The fraction tiles will be a thing today, but they can be more difficult to draw. But you could just assume that you're going to make them sound like 5/8 and not worry about lining them up. But let's go ahead and jump into the textbook, and this will be your packets for lesson 12. Begins on page 683. The expectation is that you will fill these out as we go along. That provides you an artifact that you can look back on at another time. If at any point you hear me say, I'm about to clear the screen and you need a little bit more time, make sure you pause the video then. And let's begin with example basic. 1 king crab weighs 2 3/4 pounds. A second king crab weighs 1 1/4 pounds. How much more does the 1 king crab weigh? Use models to find the difference. Anyone else picturing certain Discovery Channel TV shows as we do this? I am. It's about that time of year to start seeing that show again. All right, so we had 2 3/4 right here using the fraction tiles. And we could do an estimate. This is almost 1. So once we get rid of things, the answer should be about 2 for an estimate. In fact, on the fraction tiles, now that we had 3, it's interesting is they kind of jumped ahead here. So our estimate should be about 2. And now they removed the 1 1/4. So they crossed out the 1. So you still have 1 whole 1. And they crossed out 1/4. So we had 1 2/4, which is 1 1/2. 1 1/2 is close to 2. So our estimate will be good. But make sure you write down the 2 for the estimate. So let's move forward. And they've already done some of this work for us by crossing out things. There's 1 whole and 2 1/4 left. That represents 1 1/2. So our answer is 1 1/2. The other one, 1 1/2. And 2 is pretty close to, you guessed it, 1 1/2. If you're at home frustrated why they make you do 1 1/2, it's just so that it runs through your head. Okay, this equals 1 1/2. This equals 1 1/2. It may not be your favorite thing, however, but should be used to unfavorite things. Give you a few more seconds. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen of all these 1 1/2s. And let's look at example niche. This will be at the top of 684. Six and 11/16 minus 2 5/8. Our estimate, this is close to 7. This is close to 3. Our estimate should be about 4. and 2 5/8, we needs to be converted to 16 because 8 goes into 16. That makes it the least common multiple. And 5/8, 5 times 2 is 10. 8 times 2 is 16, which is what we wanted. We don't do anything there. This 2 over 2 only applies to the fractions because that's the part we're getting equivalent. We don't multiply this by 2. So now we have 2 5/8 as 2 10/16. So go ahead and write that in. I'll give you just a few seconds for that. It's only a couple digits, so we don't need a long period of time, especially if you've been keeping it up. All right, I'm going to go ahead and clear that screen. All right, so 6 11/16 minus 2 10/16. 11 minus 10 is 1, and you keep the 16. 6 minus 2 is 4. 4 1/16. And 4 is pretty close to 4 1/16. Go ahead and take a moment to write that in, and then we'll jump into the guided practice next. A few more seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. And we'll move forward. All right, here's your guided practice. Write your difference in simplest form. Remember, after you pause the video, solve the problem, and then unpause the video when you're ready. Go ahead, you may pause the video now. Welcome back. Let's see how you did. 2/3 minus 1/3 is 1/3. 4 minus 2 is 2. 4/5 minus 2/5 is 2/5. 5 minus 3 is 2. Neither of these need to be simplified, so these are pretty easy. Subtract your fractions and then subtract your whole numbers. Oops. Back that up. Describe the steps you would take to find 3 5/8 minus 2 3/8. I would subtract my fractions. 5 minus 3 is 2, so 2/8. 3 minus 2 is 1, so I get 1 2/8. Now I simplify to 1 1/4. Let's give you a few practice. I want you to go ahead and do numbers 3, 4, and 5. You'll pause the video and unpause the video once you're done. You may pause the video now. Welcome back. Let's see how you did. This simplified to 2/4, so 3 1/4. 3 2/7. This one becomes 3/9. So 2 5/9. At this point, as long as you start off with simplified or with a common denominator, then you subtract the fraction just like we did earlier, and then you subtract the whole numbers that go before it. On the assignment, you're going to do the same thing. Estimates largely can be in your head, but you're welcome to write it down. Remember to write in simplest form. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Hopefully this lesson went well. You may ask questions during class time or via email, and I'd be more than happy to help you out. Have a minute, Gijigad. Meanwhile, I'm a P.